All right, I think we're back alive again. If you can hear me and see me and the video looks somewhat smooth, please let me know and we can continue from here. So let me move something across the screen. See if the video is smooth. Look at that. Seems a lot better so far. Good. I tell you what I'm going to blame. I'm going to blame the Wi-Fi here. I think it was... Well, my computer was chugging pretty hard in the background too, so I guess I shouldn't say it definitely wasn't the computer. Sound is okay. It's not like getting... On the loud end, it's not... It sounds okay? Good now. Smooth. Great. Wonderful. Yeah, I don't know what was going on. Either my computer needed a refresh or it was the internet. One or the other. Smooth as water. Good to know. All right, so a few things about the course first. Next week we are going in person. What that means is you can either come to class or you can join us online. And one thing that I did is I put a poll up and sent everyone an email last night on the Acorn page. The purpose of that is to get an idea of how many people actually plan to come online versus in person. Our classroom can seat, I want to say, around 315 people. And our class has over 350 people. So if everybody shows up, that isn't going to work. And so with both options, I was anticipating a lot of people choosing online. What it's looking like so far is around 75% of the class is either going to go always online or mostly online. So what that means is if you do want to come in person, it's not like you're going to be packed like sardines into a classroom full of 300 some people. I'd be surprised to get over 100 at any one class, which that's still one person for every 3 seats. I believe all of the same health precautions that were in effect last semester are still in effect, which means things like, wearing masks while you're sitting in class. I don't know what else, the usual kind of COVID stuff. So please feel welcome to come and be safe and catch this show in person or come online and we can do it in both ways. All right, so what else? You didn't receive an email, Kanisha. If you didn't receive an email, go to our Acorn page, and at the very top of the page it says announcements, and if you click on announcements, you should see a list of every email I've ever sent the class. That way you can see if you ever missed any. If you have missed them, please let me know. I'm just anticipating now 350 emails for everybody that missed one. But the poll is there. It's going to be open for a few more days. I'm not really concerned with who comes online and who comes in person. It's more for me just like total numbers. Because if everybody wants to come in person, we have a problem just with seating capacity. But that does not appear to be the case. Yes. So what else? The unit assignments, I've actually extended the due date for the first unit assignment until next Tuesday. And the reason I did that is I believe tomorrow, I could be wrong about this, today or tomorrow is the add drop date. Might be today, it might be tomorrow, I forget. So if somebody, adds the course late, I don't want them to not be able to complete the first assignment because it was completed before the add drop date. So I just pushed the first one back. I'm not going to be extending all of the other ones by a similar amount. The plan is the second we finish it in class, the clock starts and you have 1 week. I put due dates up for that one as well as the second one, which we finished last Tuesday. Just so we wouldn't have 2 due at once, I made the second one due Thursday. So it should be very clear on Acorn when those assignments are due, and make sure you keep up with them because that's the primary component of your grades for the course. Okay, that's it for now. Oh yeah, I have to actually set up my iPad here. The one thing I forgot when I restarted everything here. you probably want to see, you're going to see probably my side of my face. Oh no, look at that, it worked. Great. So we are going to be doing another unit on, and now this is sort of good science versus bad science. It'll follow the themes of our previous units on chemophobia and toxicity. And yeah, so hopefully this makes sense and is clear. Perfect. Wonderful. Let's go. Anybody recognize this handsome fellow? He is, I guess you could call him a cultural icon for the last 50 years or so. This is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was the founder of Apple Computers way back in 1955. And he passed away, I believe, at the age of 56, back in 2011, about 11 years ago. Clearly, you know, the impact that his company, Apple, has had or continues to have on society today, it's hard to underestimate. This is a more recent picture of him. No, not Bill Gates. More recent picture of him. I think this was from, I don't know, around 2008 or something like that. He passed away in 2011. On October 5th, the following memo was sent out by the CEO of Apple, Tim Cook, to all Apple employees. Team, I have some very sad news to share with you today. Steve passed away earlier today. So this is an interesting case. You know, what happened with Bill Gates. I have Bill Gates in my brain. Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs developed a type of cancer. He developed a type of pancreatic cancer. And in fact, it was one of the few types of pancreatic cancer that is actually treatable, that responds well to surgery and chemo. This biography that came out, called Steve Jobs, the biographer said for 9 months he refused to undergo surgery for his pancreatic cancer, a decision he later regretted as his health declined. Instead, he tried a vegan diet, acupuncture, herbal remedies, and other treatments, and he found online and even consulted a psychic. So Steve Jobs, you know, essentially unlimited resources, and obviously also a very intelligent person, came up with the decision when faced with a fatal disease to basically deny what we would call maybe modern medicine or Western medicine or something along those lines. And, you know, it's not that he had no access. He had probably the best access of any person in the world, but he decided to try something else first and even consulted a psychic. Dr. Barry Cassileth said the following: Jobs' faith in alternative medicine likely cost him his life. He had the only kind of pancreatic cancer that is treatable and curable. He essentially committed suicide. This is a little bit harsher, you know, evaluation of what took place. But obviously it's a very clear and cogent example of the damage that can happen to somebody for making decisions that maybe aren't the best decisions that you should be taking at the time. And what I hope to show is that when faced with decisions like this, not to say that science always gets everything right every time, the first time, but that in a situation where you're not sure what options you should take, follow or take the options that are most rooted in evidence. Okay? It can be hard though, because, you know, sometimes you get conflicting messages, like you see here, stop and keep moving. You hear, you see articles, you see studies, even scientific studies, possibly, where depending on the source, the advice you get can be opposite. It can be very different. You know, should we eat butter? Should we eat margarine? You know, there's that whole debate. There's, are eggs good for you? Are eggs bad for you? Is aspartame good for you? Is aspartame bad for you? And you, depending on where you look, it can be very difficult to find information that you can be like sure of, that you can be certain this information is the correct information. It's hard to find. The other thing is the media plays a large role, because the media really decides whose voices are loud and whose voices are not loud, And, this meme kind of shows it. Doctor with years of scientific research, no one's really interested to listen. Whereas if you have a celebrity and they're promoting some, miracle, natural cure or whatever, they get all the attention. And I guess I shouldn't blame just the media, because it's ourselves too. It's like, we don't want to hear from somebody like the famous doctor that's boring with the lab coat and, speaks maybe using complicated words that are hard to understand. People are attracted to sources of information that are recognizable faces, that are attractive people, stylish, rich, whatever it is that we think makes these people trustworthy. So here's an example. This is Instagram. This is Katy Perry. And Katy Perry, I'm not going to throw a lot of shade on Katy Perry. She's, good music and whatever. But every once in a while, she'll have these posts, like the one you see here that says, I am all about the supplement and vitamin life. And what she's holding up are plastic bags. And if you kind of look closely, what you can see are each like smaller bags inside, where each bag is full of pills. And these pills are supplements and vitamins and things like that. And each little bag inside, you can see one says dinner, one says breakfast. At least she says online that she will consume, dozens of these supplements and vitamins every day, 3 meals a day. And, this is a lifestyle that she's promoting. And this is definitely, a lifestyle that some people follow. It's not one, and again, I think we have some dietitian students here in the class. I'd love to hear from you folks too, if you're available on the chat, to weigh in on this too. But my understanding is that for most healthy people, there's almost no needs for supplementation and vitamins in your life. My sister-in-law is a dietitian with Health Canada, and I think what she said to me is the only vitamin that most people might benefit from is, I believe, vitamin D, which is present in milk if you get it, and mostly in the winter. Vitamin D is the one that you get from going out in the sun. So if you get lots of sun exposure, you're going to get plenty of vitamin D. But depending on your diet, especially in Canada, especially in dark months like the winter, I think that's maybe the only one. And you need like super tiny amounts of it too. So Katy Perry, she has this. She has, as of May 2019 at least, 107 million followers, which is pretty big reach. And when you compare that to these organizations like Health Canada, FDA, European Food Safety Authority, these ones that we're talking about, like, nobody listens to them. They just don't have the followers, they don't have the audience, and they don't have the reach that these celebrities can have. World Health Organization actually is not doing too bad. They're almost at 5 million people. Although, I mean, that's for the entire world, right? That's just not a North American-centric organization. Gwyneth Paltrow is another one that you hear about quite a bit in this space. She has a wellness company called Goop, which originally was only online. I believe it's now maybe has a magazine, and I think it has a show on Netflix. And medical experts here obviously aren't happy about it, because almost everything that is promoted through her company, and then also that she promotes online, is based in what we would call pseudoscience, which may look like it's science or may have some of the trappings of science, but is ultimately not evidence-based, not supported by evidence, and may cause people danger by giving them false hope that this will help them, surmount health problems like what happened to poor Steve Jobs. So here's an example. If you go to Goop, of some of the products that are available for purchase. If you want, you can buy some Psychic Vampire Repellent. Protection Mist. So if you're worried about psychic vampires, I guess you can spray yourself with this. It's pretty expensive. You know, you can see the price over here in the corner, $38 Canadian for a little bottle. I mean, can you really put a price on repelling psychic vampires? I don't know. I guess probably worth that, I suppose, if it does what it says. The other one that kind of got her in a little more hot water are these things that her website sells called jade eggs. And, you know, it is just like what it looks like there. It comes in a fancy little bag with G. I don't know if that's for Gwyneth or if it means something else. But these are made from jade, which is a type of egg. And they come, you can see this, they're pre-drilled for a string. We recommend using unwaxed dental floss. So what these are sold as is you put a little string in the thing, and they're sold to women, and the idea is you put them in your vagina and you leave them there. And, you know, eventually you can pull it out via the string, but the intent is to hold it, I guess, indefinitely as you go about your daily business. And of course, the sales pitch is that this can cause all kinds of health and wellness benefits to you. In reality, though, it's actually extremely dangerous. Okay, there's no medical professional that would ever suggest this is a good thing, and it can actually cause certain negative health effects. Eventually, they got fined $145,000 for certain claims it made about these jade eggs that go in the vaginas. But you can actually still buy these things, right? Like, they're still for sale on Goop's website. And this is just, like, honestly scratching the surface. I mean, I keep my eyes open for this thing all the time. This is another example which I would say is more obvious pseudoscience, where it's really making a strong attempt to sound scientific. And most people, you know, don't have degrees in chemistry. Most people might read this and believe it just at face value without having any understanding at all. We're going to look more carefully later in this course into water and the structure of water and so on. You can see what this says is, today people drink water that has a hydrogen bond angle of 104 degrees. They need to be drinking water with a bond angle of 114 degrees. And then, of course, they say, you know, use our machine. It'll make your water bond angle change. That is completely false. There's no machine that can change the bond angle of water. And we're going to talk about why that is later on in the course. So this is just utter garbage, although it sounds scientific, you know. The idea of bond angles and molecules, for someone that doesn't know what a bond angle or molecule is, it sounds kind of official. So what is science? You know, as I said earlier, when you see all of these claims, the solution, or I guess the best solution at least, not that it's perfect, but the best solution is taking a scientific approach, evaluating the claims according to their evidence. So science is, you know, it's often believed to be a kind of collection of facts that people have learned over time, but that's not a very good explanation of science. I personally view science more as a process. It's a way of sifting through claims, evaluating claims, testing claims against knowledge, against, you know, experimental results, to see if those claims hold water. And sometimes things can be believed by scientists, and then later evidence down the road will cause them to abandon those particular ideas. So it's not static. Science does change. It evolves, and it evolves as we make more observations, do more experiments, and learn more about our natural world. So some of the hallmarks of science is obviously, like, there's scientific claims that are made by organizations or by scientists. They must result from objective observations and repeatable experiments. So by repeatable experiments, what I really mean there is, you know, if I do some sort of experiment to try to show some particular thing to be correct or true, you should be able to go and repeat that same experiment again. You know, you should get the exact same result if you do the same experiment in the same way. Okay? So we're going to talk about this a little bit more too. Pseudoscience is something that maybe seems on the surface to be a little bit like science, but at some level really isn't. If my audio, by the way, seems a little high, I'm just going to turn it down. It just looks a little... If that sounds worse, please let me know, but if it sounds better, a thumbs up in the chat should help too. So pseudoscience, to me, there's kind of variations of pseudoscience. Pseudoscience could be claims that are just not supported with evidence at all. And this could include false claims, or it could include just untested claims, right? Because you can make a claim with no support at all, and you might just by chance be correct. On the other hand, are claims that are presented as if they were supported with evidence. They make them sound scientific, but they're actually not at all based in science. In fact, they're shown to be untrue. They're shown to be false. Basically, lies, I guess, is what we would call on this side. Maybe this one is guesses. And in between, we'll talk about what this overlap looks like. Claims that are not supported with evidence are easy for science to handle. We can just take those claims and we can test them. We can run the experiments and we can see, do those claims hold water or not? We can toss them out or we can keep them. An example of this it's one of my favorite examples actually, comes from traditional Chinese medicine. Traditional Chinese medicine is a, several thousand-year-old practice in Chinese culture of, using, it's mostly herbal, it's using certain plants to treat certain illnesses. Traditional Chinese medicine is a very, very old approach to medicine and largely untested. So a lot of these were not subjected to what we would consider a modern standard of evidence. So modern standard of evidence in medicine would include things like placebo-controlled, double-blind trials, large enough groups of test subjects to draw statistical conclusions and things like that. So Chinese medicine, of course, evolved for hundreds of years without doing those sorts of tests. A pharmaceutical chemist named Tu Yu, I don't know how long ago this would have been, probably 80s or 90s, became interested in traditional Chinese medicine and wanted to view traditional Chinese medicine from a scientific lens. And in particular, she was interested in the treatment of a disease named malaria, which I'm sure you probably have heard of before or are familiar to. So what she decided to do was look up traditional Chinese medical treatments for malaria in ancient texts going back, hundreds of years or thousands of years. And what she was able to come up with was a set of treatments that, many, many different ones were proposed. I believe there was well over 100 different kind of recipes to prepare herbs in such a way as to provide protection against malaria. And one thing that she was very interested in was that many of these treatments actually have used a similar plant. And this is the name of the plant, Artemisia annua. And what she noticed, was that this was present in a lot of these. And so what she started to do was take extracts from this plant into the lab and test them against malaria. And what she noticed is she tried recipe after recipe after recipe, different preparation methods. Nothing worked. Completely ineffective. Then what she noticed is some of these recipes used a method to produce teas, as they were called, using like a cold brew process. Just like if you make coffee, you can make traditional drip coffee with hot water dripping through coffee grinds. Or there's like a cold method where you use cold water and I think you soak those beans for a long period of time. You can make teas the same way using cold water, and when she did it that way, she was able to find that the extract that she was getting was extremely effective against malaria. And the chemical reason was actually quite interesting. The plant produces this compound, artemisinin, I don't know, something like that. And it has this very weird thing, this oxygen-oxygen bond, which is very unusual in organic molecules because it's very unstable. And what happens with this drug, if you heat it up, if you use hot water, it destroys the molecule. But if you use cold water, it gets extracted out, and it's this molecule that's actually quite effective against malaria. So she was able to identify the active component in the plant. She was able to actually scale up the production of this compound, and now this drug, we call it a drug now, is like frontline defense in purified form against malaria today. And she ended up winning the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2015 for her work around isolating this drug and its subsequent treatment of malaria. So this is a nice example of a claim, you know, like the claim that this plant can cure malaria, that had never really undergone rigorous scientific testing. So she took the approach, well, you might call that pseudoscience because it's a claim that is not based on experimental evidence. And she tested the claim, and in this example at least, determined that the claim was true. Or I should say this, that the claim is true for certain methods of production, in particular the cold brew process. Other methods, other recipes that were presented didn't work at all, and so this testing was able to kind of sort out the truth from what was ineffective. So I kind of see like this claim's not supported with evidence. What I like to think about is like, imagine you have a garden and you plant your garden in April or May, and then you just go away, you know, like it's at a cottage or something, and you just leave for a couple of months and you come back in August. If you go back to your garden, it's going to be all grown up 4 feet high with weeds, but there's probably in among the weeds some good vegetables. Like you could probably, if you hunt, find a carrot or find a tomato or whatever in that sort of untended garden. So this sort of field of claims that are not supported by evidence, to me it's like an unweeded garden, and the job of science is to do the weeding, pull the weeds out and separate them from the vegetables that are good, and then hopefully build on them, right? Build on those claims. Now, some of the more negative sides of some traditional belief systems around medicine, like traditional medicine beliefs, are things, for example, like that might put certain animals in risk. For example, rhinoceros horns are, in certain systems of belief, believed to have certain medical properties. Things like they can cure cancer, or things like they can cure impotence, or things like this. And this results in a black market for these items. And even though these claims are not scientifically valid, in fact, they've been shown to be scientifically untrue, it doesn't stop people from believing in them. It drives this sort of black market for certain animal body parts. And in the case of the rhinoceros, at least, it puts certain animals at like extreme peril when it comes to survival of the species. So there's a real negative side to this as well. A recent example of this was hydroxychloroquine in the US. So when COVID was, when Trump was still president and people were still trying to grapple with dealing with COVID-19, Trump started suggesting that people should be taking, well, among other things, a drug called hydroxychloroquine, which is a drug that was never approved for treating COVID-19. He says this: many doctors think it is extremely successful, and some people don't. As you know, I took it for a 14-day period, and I'm here. So that's what we might call an anecdote. It's using a single personal story or a single personal experience as broad evidence for some claim. And anecdotes are probably the weakest form of evidence that you can have for something like this. Fauci says this: if you look at the scientific data and the evidence, if you look at the trials that are valid, that were randomized and controlled in the proper way, all of those trials show consistently that hydroxychloroquine is not effective in the treatment of coronavirus coronavirus disease or COVID-19. So, you can see two very different pictures. And obviously, both Fauci and Trump within the US had their own audiences. And there's all kinds of people that just believed what Trump said, regardless of the fact that, first of all, it wasn't supported by evidence, and second of all, that Trump doesn't really have any credentials to be able to make those sorts of claims in the first place. And of course, Trump leads crowd in Fire Fauci chant. So, yeah, that's another maybe interesting side point in science, is when kind of politics and science clash, or when politics interfere with science, and of course the issues that can arise as a result of that. Okay, we got some questions here, maybe a little breather. Chinese pharmaceutical scientist or chemist Tu Yu received the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine in 2015 for isolating an unusual compound called artemisinin from the sweet wormwood plant. Why was this substance so noteworthy? And we know the answer to this is A, it's a traditional medicine, but was found scientifically to be effective versus malaria. Got a second one right after. What COVID treatment was highly touted by former President of the United States, Donald Trump, despite no evidence that it was effective? And all of these might seem somewhat familiar to you. We talked about all of these so far. The correct answer is hydroxychloroquine. Theobromine was the compound that was found in chocolate. Artemisinin was the anti-malaria drug. And thiomersal was the preservative we talked about last class that's found in childhood vaccines, or was, if you get it from a multi-dose vial. All right, so we talked about claims not supported by science. You have these other ones, claims presented as if they were supported by science. So it's almost like false advertising or false marketing or fake news, if you want to use kind of an overused expression. You see things like this. This is a billboard that was in Calgary, just outside the city. The sun is the main driver of climate change, not you, not CO2. Put up here by friendsofscience.org. So this is friendsofscience.org, by the way, is a lobbying group for the petroleum industry. And of course, they're trying to sell the message that oil and gas exploration and development has nothing to do with climate change. And they call themselves Friends of Science to make it sound as if this information is coming from a scientific lens. So in my mind, it's like a deliberate attempt to make some people believe something that's not true. We know well, and we're going to talk about climate change later on. We know quite well, actually, the various contributions of different things towards climate change, and we do know that CO2 is definitely the major driver. All right, I like picking on celebrities in this course. I'm going to pick on another guy. This is Dr. Mehmet Oz, and I put him in this category of pseudoscience because this category is like it's not real science, it's not true, but has the trappings of science, or it's presented as if it's scientifically supported. And the reason Dr. Oz falls into this category is because of those two letters, doctor, in front of his name. He is a doctor. He's a cardiologist. He studied, he went through medical school, and medicine is very much it's a science-driven field. So by him having this credential and him offering up advice and information under this name, it leads people to believe that this is scientific evidence. It's scientifically supported because it's coming from somebody who's scientifically trained and has that title, doctor, in front of their name. Now, Dr. Oz got his start on, I believe, the Oprah Winfrey Show, but eventually it evolved into his own TV show. And this was an interesting study that was done in 2014, where what somebody did basically is they sat down and they watched, it was a couple of doctors that did this. They sat down and watched a bunch of Dr. Oz shows, and there was another similar show called The Doctors that they also watched, and they just wrote down every time a piece of health or medical advice was given, they would write down what that was. And then what they would do with that claim is go and study the claim, test it, and see if it was true, see if it was false, or see if it was kind of neither. Kind of like it's a claim that there's not really good evidence to support if it's true or not true. So maybe it's true, maybe it's not. And this is what they found for Dr. Oz, is that 46% of what he said on the show was based on evidence, was supported by evidence. And apparently, if you read the paper, the most common type of advice that was given that was supported in this 46% was around diet and around exercise. So, we shouldn't be eating a lot of processed food. Excuse me. We should be eating, fresh vegetables, etc., etc. We should be getting lots of exercise, all that sort of stuff. 15% of what he said was contradicted by evidence, so it was simply not true. And then 39%, which is a pretty big chunk, was sort of speculation, I guess you could say. It wasn't supported by evidence, but it also wasn't contradicted by evidence. So what got Dr. Oz, I guess, in some trouble is one episode where he had this guy on the left, I forget his name, on his show, and he was selling a product which was based on green coffee beans. So when coffee grows, it grows in they're little like fruits, and if you let them dry up inside, you peel the fruit off, there's a little seed inside. The seed is the coffee bean, and they're green in color when you first get them. To get the brown or dark coffee beans that we use to make coffee, you have to roast the beans first. So if you take the green coffee beans before they're roasted, what this guy is saying, you can make an extract of the green coffee beans, and he sells this extract as either a powder or as a liquid that will help people lose weight. That this is just like a weight loss supplement, and there's a lot of people in Canada and the US that are looking for easy ways to drop weight. And of course, we have a doctor on TV with a TV show promoting this product that will help people lose weight. And of course, a lot of people put money in. There's this thing called the Oprah Winfrey effect, I think it's called. When Oprah Winfrey had her TV show, she would have like the Oprah's book club. And apparently, like, if she put a book in her book club, it would like instantly sell, I don't know, like 500,000 copies or something like that. It was like just her mentioning a product once would have this huge shift. And so to the similar effect by having a product promoted on Dr. Oz's show with his stamp of approval, that would again lead to, big sales. So you could go buy this stuff, green coffee bean extract. Last night, Dr. Oz spoke about green coffee beans and how they can help you lose weight. Spoiler, these green coffee bean extracts don't do anything to help you lose weight. They don't work at all. There's no scientific evidence that they're useful in any way for somebody who's trying to lose weight. And what ended up happening was Dr. Oz ended up getting pulled in front of a Senate committee on false advertising. And this is what one of the senators said, Senator McCaskill: the scientific community is almost monolithic against you in terms of the efficacy of the 3 products you call miracles. And Dr. Oz said this: I actually do personally believe in the items I talk about on the show. I passionately study them. I recognize they don't have the scientific muster to present as fact. But that's exactly what the show does, is it presents them as fact, and it presents them under the guise of an expert, right? Under the guise of a medical doctor, which of course is going to influence people's buying behavior. In the end, by the way, they ended up having to repay $9 million to customers who had bought these. They called it the Magic Beans diet scam. So yeah, you see things like this fairly often. Not just Dr. Oz. He's just somebody that's easy to pick on, so I picked on him. So who fraudulently advertised green tea extract as an effective weight loss supplement on their TV show? And you can see there's a number of options here, with the correct answer, of course, being Dr. Oz. All right, so in the middle here of pseudoscience, between the ones not supported, which we can test, the ones that are not supported but presented as if they were, is what we have in the middle, and this is the toughest type of pseudoscience. It's claims that are made that are like partly grounded in truth. Either they take a small truth and blow it up into something bigger, or they kind of take something that's half true and make it sound as if it's something a little bit different than it is. A good example here is that toxic dryer sheets thing that we talked about before, where they say a couple of things, they take some quotes, they present some results that are actually true, but they leave out some important things. And in this particular case, what they left out was dose, route of entry, and things like that. And lead people to a conclusion which is just not correct. It's not true. So that's the hardest part. And we're going to see many, many, many examples of this as we continue through this course, of this type of pseudoscience. And really what I consider a primary aim of this course to be is to combat this type of pseudoscience. And that's not done by picking out every example of it and just saying this one's right, this one's wrong, this one's right, this one's wrong. It's more to instill in each of you this sense of skepticism, that when you see a claim being made, even if that claim reinforces a belief you already hold, not to just take it at face value, to look at possible sources of conflict, reasons why this person might be trying to give you this message. Oh, I see that. Yeah, green coffee extract, not green tea. That's right. Should be green coffee. Yeah. Where are my thoughts here? Yeah, to make you skeptical, to make you think about claims, to not accept them at face value, and hopefully give you tools to evaluate the claims. Some of this is just the basic knowledge, the basic understanding of chemistry and physics and what's possible and what's not possible. And on the other hand, valuable, useful sources, places where you can go and get information to get hopefully unbiased information that's good, that can help you evaluate these claims too. So we're going to try to build some of this knowledge in this course. And one place I'd like to start is it concerns the language of science. And often we use terms in science that have different uses in science than they do outside of science. And the first example here that I'm going to talk about is the difference between a theory and a law, where a lot of people will see something that's a scientific theory and think, well, if it's a theory, it means it's maybe not true. The theory is kind of like, it's information we have that's dodgy. It's what people think about it. Like, for example, let's say you are in class, you leave class and you go home and you find your door is open, you find muddy footprints in your dorm room, and you find your computer is missing. Oh, well, let's develop a theory about what happened here. Maybe the theory was, I left the door unlocked, somebody walked in, took my computer and ran away. Or maybe a different theory is, maybe some person you gave a key to snuck in and took my computer to get it fixed for me, or who knows, right? We kind of think of a theory as like a guess of what could be true. But in science, we have a very different understanding of the word theory. Theory in science is an explanation for why things are the way they are. It's explaining some relationship between things in the natural world. Scientific theory, think about it more like when we talk about music theory. Music theory is, kind of the explanation for why certain sounds in music are appealing to us and certain things aren't. Around certain chords and scales and blah, blah, blah. Scientific theory isn't some wild-ass guess. There's actually, what's that called? SWAG, swag, is a scientific wild-ass guess. Sometimes you see that. A scientific law is a different thing. A scientific law is just a statement of some relationship that exists in the natural world. A lot of people look at a scientific theory and a scientific law and say, well, a law, that sounds pretty authoritative. Scientific law is like a fact or a truth, whereas a scientific theory is kind of dodgy. But that's not at all what these mean. They are different things. They do different functions. And some scientific theories are extremely well accepted and supported, and some scientific laws are very poorly supported. A scientific law is just a statement of some relationship. Often it takes the form of a mathematical equation. A scientific theory is the explanation behind the law, explains why that relationship exists the way it does. So here's an example of a scientific law. Ohm's law. Ohm's law states the relationship between voltage and current in a circuit and how that's related to the resistance in the circuit. V equals I times R. Doesn't say why they're related, doesn't say what's going on inside those wires, inside the battery. None of these sorts of things. Doesn't explain at all. It just says we know the relationship between V and I. You double the voltage, you double and keep everything else the same, you're going to double the current. So this is a scientific law. A theory is something that explains why. It provides a mechanism for something we observe. So the theory of evolution is a good one. It describes how species change over time by giving the mechanism. The mechanism of evolution, by the way, there's several of them. Probably the best known one is survival of the fittest. It's natural selection, that the fittest individuals will survive and pass on their genes, and that leads to changes over time within a population. There's also aspects too around not just natural selection, but there's things called sexual selection, which is around how within a species certain organisms in the species decide on who they want to mate with. There are things like how genes are transferred throughout reproduction, how genes may develop mutations throughout time. All of these things together is a big collection of data which make up the theory of evolution, which is extremely well supported, extremely well accepted. Yet some people will throw away this idea that a scientific theory is important. Oh, it's just a theory. So this is Ron Paul. He was a U.S. American presidential candidate, Republican, and he says this: I don't believe in the theory of evolution. It's just a theory. So here's another person we could add to the list of people that should be taking my course. Of course it's a theory. It's an explanation. It's not like a theory somehow graduates and becomes a law at some point. It's just a different thing. It has a different function. So to be a good scientific theory, here's what we know has to be true. First of all, the theory has to be consistent with all current knowledge. So it can't refute things that we already know. We have to be able to verify the theory through observation and experiment. So you can't have if you said, well, evolution's not real, God just, created everything and changes things over time based on his or her own, or their is probably what I should say, their own will. Well, the problem with that theory, even if it's true, it's not a scientific theory. And it's not a scientific theory because you can't verify that through observation and experiment. Okay? A good scientific theory will predict certain things to be impossible. And a good scientific theory must also be refutable. So what refutable means is that at least in principle, the theory needs to be able to make predictions which could backfire, hypothetically backfire. All right, gravity, just a theory as well. Doesn't mean there is a theory of gravity. There's also a law of gravity. Law of gravity came from Sir Isaac Newton. So many phenomena like gravity will have both a theory and a law, where the law just describes the relationship and the theory describes the explanation for why that particular thing exists. Okay, one more question. Which of the following is not a feature of a good scientific theory? It is definite and does not change over time is not a feature of a good scientific theory. Scientific theories evolve as we learn more things. They change. They absorb new knowledge. They become more elaborate. When Darwin came out with his theory of evolution, they had not solved the structure of DNA yet. They had really little understanding of how genes were transferred through generations. So that whole half, I guess, of the evolutionary theory was not developed initially. But eventually it was, and the theory evolved, encompassed it, and then, of course, continued to change over time. All right. Next person we're going to pick on. Kind of bullies in this course, aren't we? I wonder if this course online, I guess some of these people could probably come take this course. This guy is named David Avocado Wolf. And he says this about gravity. Gravity, the idea that gravity is intrinsic to all matter, that we're fighting gravity, that we have to push our way through gravity to launch a craft up into outer space, this is all nonsense. So I'm not even going to call this pseudoscience. I'm going to call this anti-science, right? And he's got all kinds of kind of crazy quotes that he says. So he believes, for example, that mushrooms are alien species that landed on this planet from somewhere else. He believes that, what does he say? Chocolate is an octave of the sun, whatever that is supposed to mean. Now, David Avocado Wolf, he might have all these sort of crazy ideas and like to spread them. He also has very deep conspiracy theories that you'll see. But he's smart. He's a great marketer of himself. And one thing that he developed is something that we now call the David Avocado Wolf effect. Yeah, I don't know if Avocado is his actual name or if he named himself Avocado. So what he does is he makes memes, but he makes memes that are like ultra shareable. Like everybody would share, would sort of, like this and post it, and it could be posted anywhere. You see it on Pinterest, you could see it all over people's Facebook feeds, Instagram, whatever. So here's an example. He made this one and posted it shortly after David Bowie passed away. The greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. So of course, if you were a fan of David Bowie and you were saddened by his passing, and you saw this pop up on your Facebook feed or Instagram or whatever, you might be like, you know what, I'm going to share that thing. And you can see he's got his Facebook tag there. So if you really like this, maybe you'd be motivated to go to his Facebook page and like it, maybe. This is another one that he has. Love is when you sit beside someone doing nothing and yet you feel perfectly happy. That's, like, who can be against that? Like, that's just nice, right? Like, anyway, feel good. You see a lot of these things, like kind of motivational or positivity, these sorts of things in people's Facebook feeds or Instagram stories or you name it. Another one. Be who you are and say what you feel, because those who mind don't matter and those who matter don't mind. Who doesn't like Dr. Seuss? And then he'll stick one in like this. Mom, why isn't there a cure for cancer? Because, Jimmy, there is far more money to be made treating a disease for a lifetime rather than curing it in a day. So this is like a stab into the guts of, the modern medical scientific establishment. This argument holds a lot more sway, by the way, in the States, where medical care is not universal. It's not, well, I say free, although our healthcare is not free either. There's a huge cost associated with it. It's just not a personal cost if you go seek healthcare treatment. For our medical system in Canada, there are only gains for the system by preventing you to have less disease. They don't want to treat you for a lifetime. But this is suggesting that there's a conspiracy theory among hospitals, doctors, drug companies, etc., that they don't want to cure you. They want to just keep milking you for money over your whole lifetime. So yeah, here's one of our red flags, conspiracy theories. Remember, we had those 6 or so red flags that we look for when claims are being made. And I don't know if this is even really a claim, but it's sort of like just an insidious kind of jab. If you go to his website, he's got a Facebook page, he's got a website, he's got a store, and he sells all sorts of things. And he was one of the first people on the bandwagon to sell these salt lamps. I have one of these in my house. He claims they improve mental clarity, air quality, and sleep cycles. They don't do any of that stuff. It's basically a hunk of salt. It's hollowed out, and you put a lamp inside. They look kind of cool, I guess, but they don't do any of these things that it claims. If you read the article, it says this: Himalayan pink salt is one of the purest salts you can buy. That's actually trash. That's not true at all. The fact that it looks brown, or kind of like orangish brown, is telling you right away that this is not pure. The white salt that you buy at the store is more pure, because what's giving it its color, is impurities that are present in the salt. Not only does it taste arguably even more wonderful than traditional salt, and I guess that would be very arguable. I've tried both. It tastes like salt. It does everything from balancing. Remember I said cure-all, cure of all, or cause of all evils, or cure-all. It doesn't do everything. It doesn't balance pH. It doesn't strengthen bones, and it doesn't lower blood pressure. So all of these claims are untrue for this salt. So in this article, what he does, he lists a number of reasons why he thinks this is good for you. This was an interesting one. Neutralizes electromagnetic radiation. The idea here being that by having a cell phone, by having a computer, a TV, all these devices in our lives, that these are emitting some kind of electromagnetic radiation which is damaging our health. So he's saying, look, they emit negative ions into the air, which they don't. But he says they do, and that this neutralizes electromagnetic radiation. Keep one next to the computer, the television. Could you imagine if you went into your place and every single electronic device bought one of these lamps and put it next to it? Computer, television, microwave, fridge, stove, oven, washer, dryer. You'd have these all over your house. And of course, if you buy them from his website, he puts $5 in his pocket every time you do that. The one thing I find funny, though, in particular about this one claim, is light is a form of electromagnetic radiation. And this is a lamp, right? The purpose of a lamp is to create electromagnetic radiation. It's to cast light in the room. And this is claiming it neutralizes light. So, anyway, it doesn't anyway. So it's not something we have to worry about. So this is his website, and you see all these articles, and usually the articles are things that will either scare you away from something and then point you to something in his shop that you should use instead, or what he might do is, like those salt lamps, is promote some particular product as, curing some really negative thing. He's got a shop up here, right, which of course is another one of our red flags around the believability of certain claims. So all of these are really good examples, I think, of people who are making claims that kind of sound scientific or have trappings of like scientific knowledge, but are ultimately not true. What does the David Avocado Wolf effect refer to? And that's A, posting memes or articles with a wide appeal, an attempt to gain followers so that you can later promote pseudoscience or conspiracy theories. It's gathering the audience with like unobjectionable content so that you can later expose the same audience to some alternative viewpoint, with the ultimate goal of making sales. All right, so we had the scientific method. The last step of the scientific method, and arguably the most important step of the scientific method, is publication, of sharing the knowledge that you've gained from conducting science. One is, in order to publish something, you have to have it tested by experts, peers, before it can get published. And then the other thing is what you're doing is you're sharing that knowledge with everybody else. So these are two articles, Science and Nature, and these are arguably the top two best regarded journals in all of science. They can cover information from any branch of science, and it's often considered sort of like a career making thing if you can get a paper published in one of these papers. Once when I was a postdoctoral fellow, we submitted an article to Science. And the nice thing about Science is if they're going to reject you, they'll reject you within like 3 days. And 3 days after we submitted, rejection letter, which doesn't even make you feel bad because the rejection rate is like 95%. And of those 95%, almost all of them are excellent papers anyway. I was curious though, I was hoping it would get in, and didn't of course, but whatever. I was curious though if it had been published, if it was accepted and they did decide to put it in the journal Science, what else would have been in that article? And really what I was thinking is, well, what was so important that month in the journal Science that mine got rejected and they published this instead? And it turns out when that article came out, what it was about was when the Mars moon lander, the rover, I think it was called, Mars rover, first landed on Mars. It had all this scientific equipment that took all these measurements of the Martian soil, and they beamed the results back to NASA, and NASA published this series, I think it was of 12 papers or something. All 12 papers were in that one issue of Science. And I just was like, yeah, I'm just like some guy doing work in a chemistry lab in Ottawa, compared to this massive scientific effort of NASA bringing back the first scientific results from a different planet. I realized there that I was like, okay, yeah, this is that I'm not on that level for sure. So I want to tell you the story about this bird. It's called an ivory-billed woodpecker, and this is a picture that I actually took, a photograph. These are samples, these are specimens, I should probably say, in the Natural History Museum in Britain, in London. And ivory-billed woodpecker was a type of woodpecker that lived in like the southern U.S., kind of in Louisiana and Florida. And by the 1920s, they were thought to have gone extinct when they discovered a pair in the 1920s in Florida. What followed was much better accounting for populations of certain wild animals over the next 20 years. And in 1938, the estimate was that there was around 20 of these birds left in the wild, and all of those 20 lived in one particular region of Louisiana, and the response was to go clear-cut that region of Louisiana, which was the last known habitat of the ivory-billed woodpecker. And all I can really say is at that point in time, nobody really cared about endangered species or environmental impacts. It just wasn't really on people's radar at the time. The last confirmed sighting of a bird of this type, ivory-billed woodpecker, was in 1944. There's a type of woodpecker that lives in Nova Scotia that looks actually similar to the ivory-billed woodpecker, called a... what's that thing called? It's big. Someone going to beat me to it in the chat. Oh God, why can't I remember it? There's the downy woodpecker. There is the... Oh God. Pileated woodpecker. There, I got the name. Pileated woodpecker looks similar. It's a related species, but it's not the same thing. Oh look, I had it on the next slide. Look at that. This is a modern pileated woodpecker. Ivory-billed woodpecker has obvious similarities, obvious differences as well. You know, if you look at the red on the head, it's not quite the same on both. The white colors on the wings are a little bit different. They're roughly the same size. One's extinct and one's not. This is kind of a zoom in of the images here, so they're a little bit grainy, but again, you can see maybe a little bit more clearly in these pictures some of the differences in the wing patterns and so on. So imagine the world's surprise when this paper came out and was published in the journal Science in 2005. The ivory-billed woodpecker persists in continental North America. Thanks, Riley. The ivory-billed woodpecker, long suspected to be extinct, has been rediscovered in the Big Woods region of eastern Arkansas. Visual encounters during 2004 and 5, an analysis of a video clip confirmed the existence of at least one male. Acoustic signatures consistent with them have been heard from the region. Extensive efforts to find birds remain unsuccessful. Blah, 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 blah. Thank you for everyone with the pileated in there. So can you imagine, and this paper, when it was published, captured the public attention just by storm. It was like everyone was like, such a good news story that a species that has gone extinct due to human mismanagement, I guess you could say, or destruction of habitat, was found to be alive. Now, I was interested in this paper too, and here's the data that was presented in the paper. These are still images, and the one they claimed was an ivory-billed woodpecker, you can see in the picture there. This was a still from like a low-quality video feed they had, and they said, well, that's obviously an ivory-billed woodpecker. We also caught some pileated ones. That's the pileated. Isn't that obvious which one's which? And I'm like looking at that, and it's like scratching my head, and I'm like, that's your evidence that this bird that's thought to be extinct for like 60 years is still alive? That seems pretty weak to me. And I was like, how's that different from evidence that Bigfoot's still alive? How is this pseudoscience and this gets published in the top journal in science? What makes one science and one not science? And I hate to say it, but one factor is that all these people who are professionals in the field, who have PhDs and doctors in front of their name, are putting their professional stamp of approval on this, where you see very few professionals do something like this. But that shouldn't matter. In the end, all that should matter is the evidence in favor of it. And if this is just a grainy photograph and this is just a grainy photograph, why is one true and why is one not? And I'd argue that this article is not good definitive proof that the bird actually is still alive. And in fact, what happened as a result of this paper is there was extensive exploration of that part of the woods in Arkansas. They had hundreds of ornithologists camp out for weeks, months at a time, equipment set up everywhere trying to catch better video, better audio, etc., etc. And after 3 years of searching, they were unable to find any additional evidence that this bird exists. And the lead author of this study ended up coming out and saying not that they were probably wrong. He kind of hedged. He said, we don't believe there are currently any of these species left in the woods. The likelihood, from my perspective, is that there never was, or at least not since the 1930s, in this area. And that's another element of science which is important, is that in a way it's self-correcting. In a sense, this may have been wrong, this may not have been true, but it did lead to a bunch of follow-up study which confirmed whether this was true or not. So that's same in science. When you publish one paper, that paper is not just all of a sudden the truth. It's part of a longer conversation, and there may be follow-up studies that refute it. There may be follow-up studies that support it. Information continues to evolve as time moves forward. Now, I see where we're at with time, and I don't want to continue keep people here too late. I thank you for your attention today, and you will be coming to class either online or in person next Tuesday, and I'll be sending an email around that as well next week. Thank you everyone very much, and we will see you sometime next week. Have a great